Vivekanshu Verma. Dr. Vivekanshu Verma is an associate consultant at Emergency and Trauma Care, Medanta, Gurugram. He has completed MBBS from JLN Medical College, Ajmer in 2004 and Diploma in Forensic Science from SMS Medical College, Jaipur in 2011. Dr. Verma is the youngest Indian doctor to get fellowship in toxicology from the Indian Society of Toxicology in 2019. He introduced the Indian Society of Toxicology Life Support course. He is also an honorary toxicology expert with the Central Bureau of Investigation. Moreover, Sir has been honored the Award of Excellence in the field of Forensic Medicine and Toxicology by Indian Association of Forensic Medicine Annual IAFM Conference at Jodhpur 2019. We welcome you, sir. Thank you so much for joining us today. I would now request our founder, Mr. Rajendra Pal Singh, to kindly welcome our guest.
Good morning, everyone, in this online workshop. And on behalf of Law Joint, welcomes you all. We are glad that Mr. Dr. Vivekanshu Verma, toxicology expert in CBI, now is here with us to give his special remarks. Now I request Sir to please start the session.
Am I audible now?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. Hi, good morning. I am Dr. Vivekanshu Verma. We will discuss today about cross-examination in poisoning. Cross-examination is one of the most important parts in legal investigation. And when we discuss about the definition of forensic toxicology is the branch of toxicology that deals with the criminal use of poisons and the investigation and detection of such criminal use. Now, when we see the definition, there is the criminal use of poison and the investigation. The investigation does not mean just the medical investigation. It means the legal investigation which has to be done to establish that the poison has caused the crime and that had led to death or to the damage to the victim. And detection of such criminal use, that is done by the forensic science lab. Now, when we say the investigation starts from the scene of crime and it ends in the court with chief examination, cross-examination, and then the observation by the court. So in this, we will try to discuss today few of the common poisonings which occurs, which has created landmark judgments in that, and that has in the cross-examination that had proven that it was the poison which has led to the crime, or sometimes the poison was involved as such in the crime. Now, when we say poison, does it require to be defined in the legal approach? For legal purposes in India, however, the exact definition of a poison is not essential because the law usually paraphrases in explanatory form its reference to poison. Thus, in the causing of the hurt and the grievous hurt by poison, 324 and 326 IPC states, any poison or any corrosive substance or any substance which it is deleterious to the human body to inhale, to swallow, or to take into the. So we were discussing about the the purpose of the definition, whether we need to define the poison. So in this section 324 and 326 IPC states any poison or any corrosive substance or any substance which it is deleterious to the human body to inhale, to swallow, or to take into the blood. Hence, for conviction under these sections, it is not necessary to establish that the substance by means of which the hurt or grievous hurt was caused is a poison. It is sufficient if it is to be proved that it is a substance which comes under the above stated definition. Then in section 328 of IPC, causing hurt by means of poison, whoever administers or to causes to be taken to any person any poison or any stupefying, intoxicating or unwholesome drug or other thing with intent to cause hurt to such person or with intention to commit or to facilitate the commission of an offense or knowing it to be likely that it will thereby cause hurt, shall be punished with imprisonment of either description for a term which may extend to 10 years and shall also be liable to fine. Here again, in section 328 of IPC, it will be observed that the addition of the words any stupefying, intoxicating, or unwholesome drug or other thing renders the exact definition of the term a poison unnecessary for the purpose of this section. It should, however, be noted that the other thing must be read other unwholesome thing. Hence, administering a substance as to whose nature no evidence as given which was intended to act as a charm was held to be no offense in one of the old cases. Now, when we come to the section 299 of IPC, it declares about the fatal criminal poisoning. Whoever causes death by doing an act with an intention of causing death or with the intent of causing such bodily injury as is likely to cause death or with the knowledge that he is likely by such an act to cause death commits the offense of culpable homicide. So you can understand that when we go for the cross examination, the definition of poison is not important, but the implication of it becomes important. So an illustration can explain us that if A administers a substance to B with such intent or knowledge and thereby causes B's death, A may be convicted under this section of 299 of IPC of the offense of committing culpable homicide, irrespective of whether the substance administered may or may not strictly be called a poison. For it is the intent which suffices to constitute a crime, irrespective of the dose or even the nature of the substance. Now, when we say the act of criminal poisoning, when it is examined for any case of murder, then one frequent question which has been asked in the past is that many Indians consider the taking of life by bloodshed a greater crime than poisoning or strangling. So we note the use of word khoon literally means blood as a synonym for murder. So medical witnesses puzzled by the persistence with which the lawyer will cross-examine to know if there was any blood spilled on the clothes, etc. If no blood is shed, the manslaughter does not make that grievous impact, and the punishment can be reduced if the bloodshed, the crime does not look so heinous, because it becomes difficult to prove the link, the principle of Lockhart principle, in which we can say that this is the crime which has been done by that person. It has been documented in Lyons Medical Jurisprudence for India with illustrative cases in which they have described about the word khoon, which is unique to India, not in foreign countries. So when we come to cross-examination, there is always the evidence, because as we say, when we go through any scientific knowledge, then there should be evidence for this. So the medicine which is practiced in toxicology, that is the medical toxicology, it is the evidence based on the basis of cases in which they have managed the cases, rescued the cases, or sometimes the person dies during management. Similarly, in the law also, the evidence is based on the previous case reports, previous judgments which has been documented regarding the similar case. So that becomes a case which can be referred. So evidence becomes very important when we are preparing for cross examination. Then we have to always search for the references before going to the court. So when we say the procedure for recording oral evidence, it is first the summon is delivered, then the witness is permitted to refresh his memory, especially the medical witness and the witness from the police. Then oath taking is done, then examination in chief, then cross examination, in which we can ask the leading questions, then re examination, then questions put by the judge, and then the court decides about the matter. So there are 4 legal principles to prove criminal poisoning during cross examination. First is there is a clear motive for an accused to administer the poison to the victim. Second is that the victim died due to poison, said to be seen, administered to sick them. Third is that the accused held the poison in his possession to chemically kill him. and fourth, that he had an opportunity to administer the poison to the victim. So these four legal principles, they are very relevant when we are going for cross examination or we are getting cross examined. Then the purpose of cross examination is to prove the motive, then that the person has died due to poison, then there was a position in which in the accused has possessed the poison, and then the opportunity to administer. But there are loopholes in this, that if we say possession does not mean that the accused will keep the poison with himself even after the crime. Mostly they try to dispose it off. But if we trace the victim as well as the accused communication, and if we track the accused today online, we can track the person. So there was one recent case in which there was a matter in which the husband tried to kill his wife by using snake. Now when the police investigated, then they found that the accused has searched on YouTube how to use a snake to make the snake to carry it to kill another person. How they can keep the snake in a bottle or store it, and then they can release the snake and that can bite the victim. So that becomes very important. The possession at that moment, try to track, and that can be helpful in cross examination. So the motive, then the death, the possession, and the opportunity. This was documented first in the Supreme Court decision by in one of the landmark cases in Anand Chintamani Lagu versus the state of Bombay in 1960. Then coming to the leading questions to cross-examine. The most important cross-examination technique for all witnesses is to ask good questions. Good question means they should be the leading questions. One fact per question we can ask, and we have to build incrementally, build in a logical order, can be a declarative statement. We can avoid the conclusions and we avoid the adjectives while asking the questions so that it becomes simple to understand. The main objective of a defense lawyer in cross-examination are to elicit the facts favorable to his client, such as some discrepancies, inaccuracies, contradictions that could have crept in during the process of recording statement in chief. The purpose of cross-examination is to weaken, disqualify, or destroy the case of opponent. So you can understand that when we try to cross-examine any witness, then we have to find the inaccuracies, the discrepancies, which he has given in his chief examination. That can be very helpful, or sometimes the documentation. Now, when we go in some of the histories, the case histories, then we see that sometimes the documentation during the making of the medical legal reports or making the panchnama, they the witness, they are basically the expert witness. They become uh, in the uh, investigation of the crime, they write the alleged history. Now the alleged history is given by the patient or any attendant. That is important, because if the patient or the victim himself gives, then it becomes relevant. If any attendant has given, then it becomes a hearsay evidence. Then mark of identification of the victim, that is important, so that we can identify the victim in the court of law. Whether it was right side or left side of the body injured due to corrosive spill, then it becomes very important whether which side it was involved, that is documented. Then general condition at the time of examination, the level of consciousness and orientation of the victim while giving the statement, that becomes very important. The fitness for a statement has been taken. Then the ligature mark on the neck, and very obese or elderly or infants, it is almost sometimes invisible, so whether it was examined or not. Then the mental status of the victim, sometimes the victim is a mentally retarded, so then if he gives any statement, then it has to be in the presence of a psychiatrist, so that he can assess that the person, the victim who is telling what he means to say. Then sometimes some discrepancies we find is that the victim's limb is amputated or finger is amputated, which has not been documented. Then it becomes important the past history. The past history, if the person is suicidal, the victim is suicidal, then any scar marks are there on the victim is there. Because when we go through the recent updates regarding the suicide, then 309 has been decriminalized. So now the person who has attempted a suicide, they can't be punished for that act. But if somebody has abated the person to do an act of suicide, then that needs to be investigated and that needs to be justified. So these things becomes very important when we cross examine. Then some of the missing findings in critically patients, like when we do a medical legal examination, then mention it in the medical legal that the patient condition is, what is the patient current condition. That becomes very important at the time of examination. Then if the person who was a doctor has examined the person and he has missed some critical finding of injuries, then a supplementary sheet has to be filled in carbon copy by requesting the investigating officer to mark it in primary MLC about it. And no overwriting is permitted. If overwriting is done or antedating of entries are done and medical legal report, then they also become the discrepancies and they can be cross-examined. So these all things becomes relevant. Now, when we think all these things while cross-examining, then uh, we need to remember all these things in a simple way. What do we need to ask? So there, a simple mnemonic which you can remember is all W's. That is, first is who is the victim. First W is who is the victim, the name, age, gender. Then second W is which occupation. That is, the person who is a victim was doing some occupation while he got poisoned. There are many documented cases in which the person, if he is working as a spy or doing some secret work, then they become the victims. Sometimes the person who are already a witness in some heinous crime, they become the victim for poisoning. So it becomes very important that what was the last occupation or the last involvement of that person was there related to that. Then the third W is what poison consumed. So that needs to be investigated during cross examination if it was proven that the poison which was consumed was confirmed by the forensic lab that it is the same poison which is disputed in the question when we are asking in the cross examination. Then the 4W is what quantity consumed, that is whether the dose was fatal or not, because every poison becomes fatal only at a particular dose. Minimum dose is required to kill another person. So that becomes relevant to ask in the cross examination that what was the dose which must have been given to that person, which can be asked by examining that if the person has consumed has been given from a bottle, then how many tablets are missing. Then we can cross check that the around 10 tablets are missing from the bottle, and it may be when we correlate it with the patient's findings while medically examining, then the person was intoxicated with that much dose. So those clinical symptoms are visible, were visible or not during when we go through the medical records of the victim while he was in the hospital. And then we also correlate with the FSL report for quantitative assay of the poison, because if the quantitative assay says that yes, it has the fatal blood levels which correlate with the poison given and the sign and symptoms matches with that scenario, then it becomes very helpful in proving that the person has become the victim from the same poison. Then there is another W, which is when consumed. That is the fatal period. Because if the victim has consumed and the symptoms occur after consumption of the poison, then what is the fatal period in which the person may die? Although it is not exact, because if the person consumes a fatal dose, then if it is ingested, then it takes it to be absorbed into the blood circulation. It takes 2 to 3 hours for the to enter it into circulation. But if it is injected, then it can act immediately. If it is injected into blood circulation, then it can act within seconds. So fatal period is not always helpful, but at least it can prove that if the person has been given a substance which is suspected to be a poison, and the person becomes sick after 2 days, 3 days, then it it will not prove that a single dose can cause those symptoms directly. We have to correlate always that the person may have consumed or get exposed to another poison, which can help in cross examination. Now then, another W, which is what is the route of poisoning. That is becomes important. We were discussing whether it was ingestion, inhalation, or injection. Now ingestion, that is consumption while swallowing, while inhalation is somebody has inhaled inside his lungs, and injection is injected into the veins. So in criminal poisoning, injection cannot be given by one person to another until unless the victim is already in unconscious state, or he's been in a state in which it is incapacitated. Because for injecting the person, the accused should be specialized in putting the injection into the vein. So it can be a medical person who can do that. So these type of cases are reported like euthanasia. If the person is admitted and euthanasia is given, that is to kill that person as the person wants to die. Although it is illegal, but in many countries of outside India, there are few countries where, like in Netherlands, there it has become legalized for passive euthanasia if the person is in incurable state. So it is not a crime, but injection becomes important, that if it is injected, then it can be immediately fatal. Inhalation is giving something by inhalation, like chloroform. We see commonly that chloroform is shown in Bollywood movies by for kidnapping anyone. They just put few drops in the handkerchief and apply on the victim's face, and the person becomes unconscious. Although it is not actual, it is more we say that it is a myth which is related to chloroform, because it will not cause immediate fatality to that person or immediate unconsciousness, and it is locally corrosive also. So chloroform is right now not in medical use most of the time, but still it is shown in movies as an inhalant which is used to stupefy the person. Ingestion is, we say that the person is ingested, then we can cross examine about that how much the person has ingested. If the person has vomited just after ingestion, that becomes very important, because the person has vomited, then the content of the stomach has come out, and the dose which the person has consumed, mostly it becomes important in suicidal or accidental cases, poisoning, in which if the person has ingested, then the fatal dose is reduced by vomiting. So that becomes very important finding while cross-examining whether the person has vomited just after taking the drug, taking the poison. Now, then another W, which is where consumed, the place of the crime. That becomes significant during cross-examination, because to collect the evidence from the scene of crime, it has to be known that it was the same place where the person has consumed and the person was found unconscious. Because sometimes if the person has ingested, like if there is a party going on in a club and the person has been given a drink laced with that poison, like the stupefying drug, date rape drug, which we say it is misused most of the time for doing a crime, then the person is given, then it will not immediately cause the sickness to that person. After 15 to 20 minutes, the person will become unconscious. So during that, the person can move from one place to another. So the person can be shifted from the party area to the room of the hotel or some other place. So there are two different places. So we have to search for the scene of crime of both sides, because the glass in which the poison was given, the drug was given, it may be in the place of party in the hall, not in the room. So that becomes very important to collect the evidence, and then we have to cross examine always for that. Then what number of victims? Another W is what number of victims. So if the victims are not just one, it is a mass casualty in which the person has suffered the poisoning, then it becomes very relevant, because then even if it is if a food is given to, like in midday meal in schools, the midday meal is provided to children free of cost by the government of India, or in the schools they provide the midday meals. And if the child becomes sick, and if many children become sick, it becomes a mass casualty, then it automatically becomes a criminal case against the person who was cooking. Because if he has adulterated the food, if he has not maintained the proper hygiene, if he has not used the material which was hygienic, which was fresh to prepare the food, and it has caused food poisoning, then it also becomes a criminal case. And then the person becomes a culprit who has cooked the food, who has provided, and the school in which it has been prepared. That is a place of crime. So they all become involved, and they all need to be cross-examined for the what number of victims they have. Then coming to another W, which is who gave the poison. This is whether if it was suicidal, homicidal, or accidental. This question comes mostly in homicidal, because if the person has taken himself or herself, then it becomes irrelevant, because the person has consumed herself. But that statement has to come from the victim himself, not by any another person. If another person says that the person has attempted suicide and the victim is still unconscious, or if the victim has died without giving any dying declaration, then it becomes a question mark whether the poisoning was suicidal or it was homicidal, which has been just made into a suicidal scenario. So we have to always see that who gave the poison has been documented in the police investigation or in the dying declaration when the victim was in the hospital during treatment. And then comes why. The last W is why. That is whether what was the intention, because then it becomes a motive, that the person has the criminal intent, has the animosity, the accused has the animosity with the victim, and then it became intentional. Or sometimes it is non-intentional. A non-intentional occurs is when it is not meant to that person, and it becomes like in children, if they are playing at home and if they find their grandmother's tablets, sleeping tablets on the wardrobe, and they just take it and taste it, and they swallow, and they come in the unconscious state, then uh, they become the non-intentional victims, and it is accidental. Then it becomes very important in suicidal cases that if the person has written a suicide note, then it has to be cross-examined by the handwriting expert from the forensic team, that they are able to prove it during cross-examination, that it is the same writing which matches with the victim's writing, and it should not be it has to be proven that it is not fake. Then it becomes that it is a suicide note. And sometimes in suicide note also, the victim may write about who has abetted the person to do the suicide. So then cross-examining that suicide note becomes important. So these are all W's which can help you in examining a witness in poisoning. They can be helpful in cross-examination. When we cross-examine a witness, we have to confirm that is what you said before. We have to give the credit for volunteering the statement. If the witness gives a statement by himself that he thinks that it can be this, like a medical witness who gives a statement that he thinks that this poisoning scenario seems to be an opioid poisoning, or it is related to particular toxidrome. Then we have to credit that person for that he has volunteered the statement while cross examining, and then we clarify. So the answer, what was the answer to my question, is yes or no. So we have to always clarify with the witness whether he has answered it in the same manner in which we can understand, or it is something else he means. And then we have to confront confront the witness if it is a hearsay. Sometimes it is just a hearsay in evidence that the person has heard about, that this poison has been given or this poison was administered. So it becomes a hearsay evidence. Like if the patient is brought to the hospital and the doctor gives the evidence that he has consumed a pesticide. Now it is a hearsay evidence because the person has told to the doctor, the victim has told to the doctor, and the doctor says about it. So doctor has always have to mention that it is stated by the victim himself that he has consumed a pesticide. So that confrontation is important. So we have to, these are all four C's we can cross examine. It is the confirm, credit, clarify, and confront. So they can be helpful while cross examining a witness. So there are few mnemonics, they're easy to remember, in which we can easily cross examine the victims, because we will go through few cases which were relevant, but we should get into our mind that what we want to ask to them. We have to do a homework for cross examining. So when we examine a doctor, then we have to check for the duties of the doctor in case of poisoning. What are his duties? It is the prevention of absorption of poison. Then suitable antidote administration has been given. Psychiatric consultation has been taken to prevent future if it is suicidal, and to prevent repeated attempts. So these are, in suicidal cases, the duties of the doctor need to be always questioned. Now there is another thing which we need to do while when we go for cross examination. Then we have to think whether it is a bailable offense or non-bailable offense when we are examining. So there are many ways in which we can remember the things, that whether it was a non-bailable offense, by seeing the section, by seeing the allegation which has been put, or by the observation of the chief examination. But there is a simple way in which we can remember according to the IPC. When we go by the IPC sections, then there are numbers which are given to the IPC, like it is section 328 of IPC. If we see the section 328, the last number is 8. 328. So the 8 is an odd number or even number. It is an even number. So if we go through most of the sections which are applicable to crime related to human body, if you go through them, it is just a coincidence I have found, which can help you out in while cross examining, that if a person is getting examined, and if the IPC which has been mentioned in the police investigation, if it is even or odd in the last number. So if it is 328, it is criminal poisoning. If it is 326, it becomes it becomes a non-bailable offense. Then we go through the 314, causing death in an intent of miscarriage. 316, again 6 is causing death of a quick unborn child, like aborting with abortifacient drug. Then there are few other sections like 364 IPC, kidnapping for ransom. In this stupefying poison like chloroform is used. Then human trafficking, 370, again even number. Then 372, selling or hiring minor for prostitution. Then 376 of IPC, that is sexual assault. In this also, it becomes, these are non-bailable offenses, and it becomes very relevant when we go through the what is used for the summoning the witness. If you see the summon of the witness, then on that these sections are mentioned, and that can help you out, that if it is an even number, then you have to cross examine, because you have to cross examine very thoroughly to that witness, because it is a non-bailable offense which has been mentioned. So if you have to bail out your um, the person for whom you are acting as a defense, who is an accused, then you have to thoroughly cross-examine so that you can find something which can prove that the section which has been applied is not applicable in this case. So this needs to be noted while you are cross-examining a witness like a doctor, that you can go through. The doctor is both an ordinary and expert witness. Doctor can be an ordinary witness when he reads the report, the medical legal report, the hospital records. And doctor becomes an expert witness when he analyzes and gives the opinion regarding the grievousness of injury. So he becomes an ordinary witness as well as an expert witness. So whenever the doctor is answering, you have to always be exact that what is the finding he has found. So he has to state what has been documented. He can't add on anything on his spot, because then it will be his volunteering the statement. And if the cross-examination is happening after 2 years, then whether the person was able to remember by his recall all these things, then it becomes relevant to cross-examine whether it has been documented or not. So that becomes very important cross-examination. Then we see what the exhibit, what exhibit has been done while cross-examining. That
Sir,
is the
sorry to interrupt you.
yes.
Uh, uh, we have glad we are glad that we Abhijat sir, Honorary Secretary, Delhi High Court Bar Association, has joined us. So we
Okay.
welcome you, sir, here in our Law Joint webinar, 2-day online workshop. Sir, welcome you.
I am so sorry. Because of multiple technical problems, I was late in joining. And thank you, Mr. R.P. Singh and Law Joint and the Bar Council of Delhi for having invited me. Really sorry to interrupt what was a very enlightening talk. Please resume. And my apologies once again.
Thank you, sir. No problem. Sir, please start.
Yes. So we were discussing about the questions which are asked to a medical witness. So when we cross-examine, we have to start with, did you examine the patient named, and if so, what did you observe? Did you find any external marks of violence on the body? To what do you attribute the symptoms, to disease, poison, or other cause? If to poison, then to what class of poison? Then asking, have you formed an opinion as to what particular poison was used? So these are the common questions which are asked to medical witness while examining, and that can help you in maintaining the chain in which you are able to, whether the person has maintained the chain of custody or not for the sampling. So that becomes very relevant. So there are two responsibilities of the doctors to maintain the chain. That is the chain of survival of the victim from the crime scene investigation to the nearby hospital, and then the chain of custody of samples from the crime scene to the forensic science lab. So these two chains becomes very relevant for the proving in the cross examination whether that was maintained or not, because the doctor, while doing the medical legal documentation, his first duty is to save the life of the victim, and then the second duty is to maintain the chain of custody while taking the blood samples and carrying it forward, handing it over to the person who becomes the like investigating officer, who is the responsible person to take the samples to the forensic science lab. So this sample collection and handing it over in a sealed package becomes very important, and it is the procedure of the law in which we have to follow, which can help you out in finding the loopholes or the discrepancies. So what are the common samples which are preserved in suspected poisoning? They are the blood, urine, the clothes, the gastric lavage. They are preserved for chemical analysis. Now, what is the purpose of clothes? Why they need to be kept? Because if the person who has vomited after consumption of poison, so those vomit stains can be used for identifying the suspected poison. So, and then if the person has been injured by any weapon or any blood stains are there, then also the clothes becomes important. Sometimes the victim is assaulted, then also the clothes are torn or some button is missing. So that becomes according to the Locard principle, that can be used in proving that this is the same cloth or not. So that has to be cross-examined. So the doctor is always asked whether it is the same cloth which you have preserved while you examined the victim and you have sealed it, because then it is sent to the forensic lab for analysis and they are brought as exhibit in the court of law. So they become exhibit only when the medical witness identifies that this is the same clothes. So the doctors always mention the color of the clothes, the number of the clothes, and if there is any brand label on the cloth which is mentioned, or there is any specific remark which can be given, like if it is torn from one side or if there are blood stains are mentioned on that, so that becomes relevant to recall that these are the same clothes, to verify. So that verification becomes important. Then the containers with toxicology samples must be cross-examined whether they were properly labeled, the suspected poisoning, and then we can prove that the chain of custody, that the samples should be handed over to the police investigating officer to be shifted to the FSL as soon as possible. So the duration becomes important in these cases. So this can be beautifully understand. We can understand this chain of custody in one of the very recent case which came into controversy, and we can go one by one with the questions what they asked and how it becomes relevant. It was an infamous drunken driving case, hit and run case causing 4 casualties, in which 2 sustained grievous hurt and 1 expired on the spot. And accused allegedly consumed alcohol, which was a strong, like the content which was told was it was Bacardi 151. It is named for its alcohol proof level, that is 75.5% alcohol by volume, and it is much higher than typical rum of 35 to 40%. So you must be able to recall this case. It was a infamous case which came in the Mumbai High Court. According to the said chemical examiner report, the blood contained 0.062% weight by volume of ethyl alcohol, weight of volume 62 mg per 1000 ml. Now we will go how the cross examination went through. When it was in the trial court, they have observed that the accused had in his blood alcohol exceeding 30 milligram per 100 ml, that is 0.062 milligram percent, and that he is under the influence of alcohol to that extent to make him incapable of exercising the proper control over supravehicle, and thereby he committed offense punishable under section 185 of Motor Vehicle Act 1988. But when it went through cross examination in the High Court, then there were few questions which were asked which became relevant to the smell. Whether the lawyer asked, what did you notice to the medical witness? He asked, what did you notice in accused during medical examination? Doctor answered, I took the history from the accused about alcohol consumption, but it was denied. Then I made examination of the breath and noticed that the breath was smelling of alcohol. Pupils of the accused were slightly dilated and his gait was normal. His speech was found coherent. I asked the accused for verbal consent for extracting the blood. He obtained left thumb impression of the accused on his register, so also obtained signature and then proceeded for collecting the blood sample. The lawyer argued that neither the police officer who brought the accused to the hospital nor who arrested the accused have noticed any smell of alcohol in the breath of the accused. So these contradictions, they are in cross-examination. The first contradiction was the smell of alcohol. Then second contradiction was breath smell alcohol not mentioned in medical legal report. Lawyer asked, is it true that in the case records of the hospital, the important factor in clinical examination was breath smell alcohol? The doctor answered, I carefully wrote the clinical observation in my case paper. It is true in back portion of the medical legal report, there is no mention that breath smells of alcohol. It is correct to say that besides smell of alcohol, there can be other smells found from the mouth which resembles the smell of alcohol. So it is true from the case paper. It can't be said that the accused patient accused was smelling of alcohol. So when the accused was admitted as a patient, it is in the case paper they have mentioned, but in the medical legal report, it is not mentioned about the breath of smelling of alcohol. So that became a contradiction, which was traced by the cross examination. Then about the gait and speech, the lawyer asked, "It is true. There appears to be a gap between the word."
In the meantime, when sir will join again, we welcome Abhijat sir, and we request Abhijat sir to give few remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. R.P. Singh, for the opportunity. I would have been very happy to give some remarks, but the purpose of my joining actually is to learn, because I have absolutely no clue about forensic sciences. The subject is completely alien to me, and it was a very enlightening talk that I just witnessed. So, in fact, my mind is full of curiosity and questions regarding forensic examination, especially of questioned documents, etc. So, I'm not really somebody who's competent to shed light. I'm here and watching and learning and taking notes. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Vivek Kanshu sir has joined.
Yes, sorry, it was disconnected due to the electricity problem. So we are discussing few more things in the same case. It was about the written consent from the accused for blood sampling. So there was the defense lawyer asked the doctor, "Did you took written consent from the accused before examination or for blood sampling for the alcohol?" Doctor answered that on the case paper there is no mention that the consent of the patient and the accused was obtained prior to his clinical examination or extraction of the blood. Lawyer argued that in fact asking for the extraction of the blood for alcohol consumption is asking a person to procure the material which ultimately may be used against him, and if this is the ratio behind it, then consent of the person is required to be obtained. The submission on behalf of the accused was that though the blood was collected, there was no apparent consent given by him, and more so, his thumb impression or signature were not appearing on the OPD papers. So this was another discrepancy which was found, that written consent was not there from the accused for blood sampling. Then about the blood sampling procedure. Cross-examining the blood sampling procedure, the lawyer asked, "Who has collected the blood sample, the doctor or the nurse?" It is significant to note that this doctor has, in one sentence, gave the procedure as to how he collected the blood. Doctor's words are, "I extracted the blood. After taking the blood sample, I directed my office ward boy to seal the blood sample in my presence. The bottle was sealed as per the standard procedure maintained by the hospital. There was two containers called vials. One vial was having oxalate preservative and other vial was plain. The bottles were capped by white color bandage, the sticking plaster. The seal of lac was put on the upper and lower end of both the vials, and the labeling of the EPR number about date, time, and PC number was done, and it was wrapped around the two vials. I also put signature on the label." These are the doctor's words well documenting about the blood sampling procedure. So then the lawyer asked, "While taking sample, did you clean the skin with antiseptic solution?" Because it is the simple procedure in which whenever the blood sample is taken, it has to be disinfected by an antiseptic. Now, if you have used alcohol rubbing for disinfection of the skin before sampling, then that can give false positive reading. The doctor answered, "In this case, I have taken the sample without applying antiseptic alcohol rub, so no chance of error in sampling is possible." So that is, error of sampling was disproved. Then discrepancy, how much blood was taken. Now there was discrepancy in this. The lawyer uh, asked the doctor, "How much blood collected from accused?" The doctor answered, 6 ml blood extracted at JJ Hospital, 3 ml in each vial. Lawyer argued the discrepancy as to the total quantity of blood is also required to be discussed when it was 6 ml extracted at JJ Hospital, 3 ml in each vial, and total 4 ml received at the forensic lab as per the records. So this discrepancy was came out in the cross-examination. Then identification of the accused. The lawyer questioned negligence of the doctor in taking thumb impression and signature of the accused as identification mark. Doctor accepted that there was no signature of the accused as well as his thumb impression obtained on OPD form or case paper. It is true there is a circle made on for obtaining the thumb impression of the patient and also the signature. It was the doctor's duty to obtain the thumb impression as well as the signature on the OPD form, which the doctor accepted. Then, in cross-examination about delay in taking the blood sample, lawyer asked why there was delay in taking blood sample. Accident occurred in midnight. Samples were taken in afternoon from the accused. The doctor answered that first hospital didn't have the facility for sampling. So accused was referred to bigger hospital, that is the JJ hospital, and samples were taken, so got delayed. Then the lawyer argued that the blood samples of the deceased victim who died during accident was sent from the first hospital only. Then why not the sample of the accused sent from the first hospital? So the blood samples were sent of the victims, but not of the accused from the first hospital. So that there was a delay in taking the blood sample. So it was a defense that the accused may have consumed alcohol after the accident, not before or at the moment of the accident. So that was a question which was raised. Then the chain of custody of the blood sample. On this, it was asked from the doctor during cross-examination, did you maintain the chain of custody of the blood sample for alcohol? Doctor answered that he could not tell the name of the constable to whom the blood sample was delivered. The defense lawyer argued that in case of appreciation of biological evidence, a chain of custody is required to be established. And if it is not established, then the biological evidence is not trustworthy and is required to be discarded as apparently it is the evidence as that of an expert witness. Then coming to the evidence of doctor on the aspect of sealing the blood sample. Now, what is the procedure of chain of custody of biological sample? The person who collects the sample seals it after labeling and hand it over to the police officer and takes the receipt of the sample. Similarly, the police officer will hand it to the sample in his custody to the concerned forensic lab as soon as possible. The purpose of chain of custody is to avoid tampering and manipulation with the biological sample. Now, in this case, hospital admittingly, according to the doctor, the ward boy sealed the sample bottles. Though it was so, the sealing process was told by the doctor and not by the ward boy, as the ward boy was not examined. By pointing out this, it is submitted that the evidence of the doctor on the aspect of sealing is hearsay. And in fact, this hearsay is on the material aspect, which goes to the root of the matter touching the authenticity of the blood sample which reached the forensic lab. So this was found in the cross-examination, the evidence of doctor on the aspect of sealing blood sample. It was hearsay. Now, alcohol not printed in the medical legal report carbon copies. This was another controversial thing they found. The defense lawyer asked why word alcohol was not printed on the back portion of the medical legal report. The doctor answered, according to me, the word alcohol was not printed on the back portion of medical legal report. I can't say why the word alcohol was not imprinted on the back portion of medical legal report. I had compared the entries mentioned in the MLR with the entries mentioned in the EPR register. It is true that while verifying the entries in the back portion of the MLR with EPR register, I made entry with ball pen on back portion of MLR, which was not imprinted while writing. So it can be a discrepancy which can occur, although it can be accidental sometimes. Like if you are writing on a carbon sheet with a carbon copy, and if you are using a fountain pen instead of a ball pen, so it will not imprint while you're writing on the, but the allegation can be that it was a late entry which was done later on when the carbon copy was not there. It was just on the main MLR the entry was done and there was no carbon copy which was kept below. So it is antedating of the entries which can be possible. Then the last point which was raised was defense lawyer asked the honorable judge, by pointing out these answers of the doctor, it is strongly submitted on behalf of the accused that there is manipulation and insertion of the word alcohol in the OPD papers, and apparently such word alcohol could not have been also present in the original EPR register. The fact remains that the doctor had not given any explanation as to why the word alcohol is missing from the backside of the OPD paper. So the High Court observed, needless to mention, that in every criminal trial, the burden of establishing the guilt of an accused is on the prosecution, and that guilt is to be proved beyond reasonable doubt. The benefit of every reasonable doubt which arises out of the evidence adduced must necessarily be given in favor of the accused. In this case, considering the various weaknesses in the case of prosecution, various shortcomings such as non-examination of necessary and appropriate witness like the ward boy, the omissions and the contradictions in the evidence of the injured witnesses which go to the root of the matter, definitely a doubt has arisen as to the involvement of the accused for the offences with which he is charged. So the Honorable High Court observed, by pointing out the main glaring defect, thus suggesting of fabrication, the defense lawyer made various submissions that according to the doctor, the thumb impression and the signature of the accused was taken on the EPR register, but was not proved by sending the signature and thumb impression for the forensic handwriting expert. So these were not examined by the handwriting expert whether the signature was of the accused or not. Every institution dealing with medical legal work must maintain a medical legal register. This is also called variously as police register or emergency police register. In this register, a copy of all the entries on the case papers are made. So other findings which supported, finally, firstly, though the investigation might be impartial, it was conducted in such a careless and faulty manner with scant regard to the established procedure laid down in the law, more particularly the procedure required for establishing the chain of evidence when the case is based on the biological evidence. Or secondly, the investigation was so conducted to loosen the prosecution case. Other findings which supported the cross-examination, the flaw in evidence to establish the chain of custody for the alcohol consumed, lapse in the procedure's role, and then as per the section 185 of Motor Vehicle Act, the officer is bound to conduct the breath analyzer test, but it was not done. And the breath analyzer test was has to be done by the arresting police officer. Then the trial court had erred in accepting the hotel bills as documentary evidence in their judicial role, and bills were recovered without there being any panchnama by the police during patrol. And the bills, although saddled with the fabrication proved by the defense lawyer's cross-examination, and evidence of eyewitness was not marshaled properly, thus became invalid. And these all things highlight that the cross-examination becomes very important, very relevant while examining a case which is related to poison, related to alcohol, or related to any substance uh, which can affect the investigation and which can help out in getting the bail out the accused. So these things we need to understand, and we have to ultimately go through similar cases for analyzing, for learning that cross-examination becomes very important. So again, we are coming to another case. This was which was one of the case which was related to a serial killer who was a tourist guide who hunted lonely foreign tourists in the ocean and sea beaches and relaxing and tanning in swimsuits, tricked and laced these victims' rings with a powerful laxative made of croton, that is Jamal Goda. Now, this was an act which does not make any crime as such if the person is given a purgative, a laxative that will cause loose motions to that person. So it is just a what we say an act in which to irritate that person, to just uh, when the victim is traced. But as a good Smartian, it was he used to not to disclose about this, that he has added this as a good Smartian. Then he used to offer them first 8 ORS packets and pills which contains the actual poison, that is the methaqualone, pretended as the anti-dysentery medication, and stupefied them to rob and kill. And he became the infamous Bikini Clear. You must have heard about the Charles Shobraj. So in that case, it went through the session court, then to the High Court, and then to the Supreme Court of India, and it was cross-examined. The case was cross-examined by the defense lawyer, and they asked that about the intention of the person who has done this. So that needs to be proven. That was proven by getting the sampling done from the victims as well as from the scene of the crime, and then it was proved that it contained a fatal drug, and that's how it proved that the intention by cross-examination of the accused is to kill the person. And that proves that there are four principles which we are discussing today, is that there should be a motive was to rob, then there was a possession of the poison by which they have consumed, and the person has died due to the poison, and the accused has the opportunity to administer the poison to the victim. So these four principles we have to uh, take home as a message for understanding the cross examination. So now I back to the organizers if anyone has any questions related to that.
Participants can ask questions write their questions in chat box, so we can ask, we can forward to.
One very good question which has been asked, it is, what is Locard principle? So the Locard principle says that if at the scene of crime, anyone, the victim, the accused, they come in contact with each other, then they will leave the trace of their contact in the form of the fingerprints, in the form of the hair of the victim or the accused. If they even move out from that scene of crime, the evidence, the trace evidence will be found there, which can be traced even after days or months, because the hair will not get decomposed. So that becomes very important to track. The Locard principle has been applied while crime scene investigation was done to track the evidence. This is known as the tracing the evidence which is not visible to the naked eye. So the hair will be visible only when it is examined by with a very powerful light, and sometimes by using the lens. Similarly, the fingerprints are latent, and it has to be by putting the forensic lab, they will examine it on the glass, on the doors, on the knobs, and that can help out. Then second question we have got is the case name which we discussed, the cross examination. It was the Salman Khan case. I thought that you must have guessed about this. This was the Salman Khan case in which he got acquitted from the charges of from the Mumbai High Court. Then there is another question which is asked is, can you illustrate the difference between examination in chief and cross examination?
ठीक है, मैं अभी आ रहा हूँ 12 बजे तक करवाए थे.
So when we say it is chief examination and cross examination, chief examination is we are not asking any leading questions in chief examination. We just ask about what the person who is the witness has observed, what the person has documented, so they can give the brief history, the brief findings in the examination chief. And cross examination, we ask the leading questions to highlight that whether what they observed was there any contradiction in that, or there is any discrepancy in which we can highlight. So that becomes the importance of cross examination. So that is the main difference when we ask for the examination chief and cross examination. Another question which is asked is, in toxicology report, what all are covered in the toxicology report? What is that report all about? So toxicology report is basically it is an analytic report which is generated by the forensic lab or sometimes by chemical examiner report, which documents the contents of the sample which the doctor has sent for the analysis. So it can be the blood, the urine, the gastric lavage, or sometimes the container from which the poison has been consumed. So it can either identify, that is, it is a qualitative report in which it will just identify the contents, and second is a quantitative report in which it will quantify the content, how much level of the poison in that content is there. Like in the gastric lavage or blood, it becomes very relevant that it was a fatal dose which was taken, then fatal blood levels are found. So that becomes very important in getting analysis of the toxicology report. Sometimes it can confuse you also, because if it found something in traces, like if we examine the tap water and we send it for analysis, we will find pesticides in this. So it does not mean that the water becomes poisonous to us, because the level of the pesticide is below, which is permitted level. So it is below the level in which it can harm us. So, and it is since it is in the vegetable, so it goes into the water when it is washed away, and that goes into the seepage into the ground, and it comes out when we take the water from the tap. So it becomes very important to understand and analyze the toxicology report. Second question which is asked is, what kind of cases the fingerprints are essentially to take or to substantiate the case? Now, when the crimes are related to human body, or the crimes in which the physical evidence is generated on the documents, on the place where the crime has happened, then the fingerprint becomes relevant. Most of the crimes, human crimes related, the fingerprints are examined because the poison is a weapon which is hidden, which does not itself leave the trace unless you go for the chemical examination. So fingerprint proves that the connection between the accused on the victim. So fingerprint can become very relevant for substantiating any crime, like it is a crime of murder, attempted murder, homicide, or if it is a crime related to sexual assault, then also fingerprint becomes relevant. Or it is a crime which is, even if we say the prints, they become relevant if it is a roadside trauma. So if the roadside trauma occurs and the print of the tires, they come on the clothes of the victim, so they also become important, relevant to substantiate the Locard principle. Then we have one question in which, what apart from the example you illustrated, what care should an IO take to prove the facts beyond reasonable doubt? Now, this case was just an example. The procedure which says, according to the law, is to, if you want to prove a case beyond reasonable doubt, then the story of which is prepared when we say the crime scene has been examined, there should be a logic in which we can prove the association between the victim and the accused. That has to be tracked first, that who are the suspected accused, then what is their intention of the crime. So that has to be substantiated with evidence. Either it is the evidence of the any SMS from the mobiles, or it can be emails, or it can be some suicide note in which it is written, or sometimes it can be evidence which is collected from the scene of the crime, that like the fingerprints. So they all become the proof beyond reasonable doubt. Then another question which is asked, the toxicology, is it about the poison, the content of the poison only, or any sample taken, like blood? So it is gas viscera report. I think this question is not readable, but I can make it understand that the poison, content of the poison, or any sample taken, like blood or viscera report. So when we go for any post-mortem examination, then in that the viscera means the vital organs which sustain the life of the person, the victim,
So if it is a fatal poison, it will affect the vital organs and it will cause the damage, the irreversible damage to the victim, and that will lead to the death. That has to be proved medically. Then it becomes relevant that the same poison has caused the death of that person. So that is relevant for the toxicology report. Coming to another question, are these forensic labs controlled by the government, or these are in the private sector also? So mostly forensic labs, according to the Indian law, the forensic labs are mostly running in the government centers. They are owned by the government. They are mostly run by the police department, and they, to maintain the authenticity of the lab, they are controlled by the police department so that the chain of custody is maintained. Although in private sector also many labs are working, but they are chemical examiner lab in which they are doing it for the benefit of the patient, for medical management of the patient. But they can be taken as in cases for medical legal examination, the reports can become relevant because it is the chemical report. But the authenticity is more for the government labs than to the private labs till now. Then coming to another question, what is cross contamination? So cross contamination is they are not maintained, the chain of custody is not maintained, and they are getting exchanged. So the victim who died from a stimulant, and the document which is generated is a depressant, like a poison which causes comatose state is given, and the report which says it is a stimulant. So that contradiction can be found when there is cross contamination. So there is always a chain of custody is maintained. So all the people who are involved, the police officer, the doctor, the forensic expert from the lab, they are examined in person for verifying whether this sample which was taken, the chain of custody was maintained to reduce the chances of cross contamination. Then there is another question, what exactly is neurolaw? There is no word as neurolaw, I guess, till now. Coming to next question, hypothetically, if a case pops up in the court in which a person gives the poison to another person with the intent to kill that person, but that particular person was already dead and the person who gave the poison was unaware of this act, will he be charged with attempt to murder or not? Now, it is a rare possibility. This can happen as an allegation, and in this, the post-mortem examination will help out that what was the time at which the expected time of death that is asked by the doctors, and if the person was already in has crossed that period in which the poison may have been administered. So that can help in cross examination to disprove whether the poison given has actually caused the death or not. The second thing is the motive which was there or not. Then the poison has caused the death or not. If the person has already died and if the poison is administered, so it will not circulate into the vital organs and it will not be proven to be found in the viscera of the victim and who is already dead. So that can help you out in cross examination that this is not the poison which has killed the person. Person was may, and you can in post-mortem examination you can also find the cause by which the person may have died, like the person may have been killed by a gunshot, so that can be found and the poison is found. There was one case which was actually happened, this case happened in which a person was uh, uh, depressed and he jumped before the train and he consumed a drug also. So the lawyer asked that what is the probable cause of death. So the medical person who examined, who didn't went to the case papers, he just saw the report of the chemical examiner, and he said that it contains morphine. So that is the cause of death because morphine is a fatal poison, and it has toxic levels in this. But then the post-mortem report was examined. It was found there was a decapitation of the head of the victim on a spot. So before the post-mortem report was examined, it was found there was a decapitation of the head of the victim on a spot. So before the morphine would have killed that person, it was the decapitation injury due to the due to the train which crossed over to that person who attempted suicide. So the cause of death was actually the decapitation, not the poison itself. But it was consumed for making the suicide successful. So that is the loophole which was found in one of the important case. Coming to next question. Can you kindly repeat the 4 underlying principles of cross-examination of the poisoning? 4 principles are simple to remember. You can remember all P's. That is the purpose, that is the motive. The second is the poison, that is the person has died due to that poison. Third is the possession to chemically kill him. That is the accused has the poison in his possession at the time of doing the crime. And the fourth is that he has the opportunity to administer the poison to the victim. So these all are documented in the Supreme Court decision in Anand Chintamani Lagu versus State of Bombay, and it is repeatedly quoted as the 4 principles to prove during cross-examination that it is a case of poisoning which has killed that person. Then coming to another question, how can we as advocate be a part in the forensic sector? How to enter the sector, any experience required, or what exactly we have to do? How to learn more about forensic? Now in this, it is very important subject for the advocates, and forensic sector is basically the practice of as a criminal lawyer. If you are practicing as a criminal lawyer, then you have to be very well versed with the forensic, and in this there are few courses which are done in which you can attempt them. You can subscribe to journals of the forensic sciences, forensic medicine. Indian Association of Forensic Medicine generates a journal. You can follow it up, and that can update you regarding the recent updates of what are the recent updates about the forensic sector, in which that can help you in administration of law. So as a lawyer, it becomes very helpful when you are practicing as a criminal lawyer to understand the forensic principles, not only in poisoning, even in cases of the violent crimes like sexual assault, in cases of murder by gunshot. So these all things becomes very important to learn and understand. Coming to next question, what are controlled substances? Now controlled substances means a substance which is getting controlled by the law. So it is NDPS Act, it controls the substances. These substances are the narcotic and psychotropic drugs like the morphine, codeine, cocaine. These are all controlled substances. They are not available for sale. They are not available for buying just like any medication. So they are regulated. Even if you are buying morphine for a person who needs to be given for acute heart attack, we give morphine, then it is controlled. So it has to be documented. There is a proper NDPS register in which you have to make an entry, and then you have to submit it to the for the drug control that you have used that medication, and you have to maintain the register, and you have to keep it in double lock so that it is not misused. Then another question we have, can cyber forensic be used in civil proceedings? So it is a different question. I will not answer this. Mr. Rajendra Singh sir will be able to rightly answer. I will come to next question. What is the difference between autopsy report and postmortem? Now this is I guess same. It is either we say it when we say we are going for an autopsy report, it is the postmortem examination which is documented. But few of the organizations, they write it as autopsy report, but it is the postmortem examination of the victim, which is mentioned in most of the legal documents as a medical legal report. And since the autopsy is done, it is a postmortem examination is done, so word autopsy means postmortem. Then coming to next question, any chance of smelling in mouth which is similar to alcohol smell without consuming it due to one medical problem which may be medicine? Yes, there are many substances which smell like alcohol, like a cough syrup. If you are consuming a cough syrup in UK, if you are consuming a cough syrup, you have to carry the prescription of that cough syrup while driving, because if you are on roadside examined by a breath analyzer, it comes out positive, then you can justify that it is due to the cough syrup you are taking. So that will become your defense for you. But many people who are not able to find alcohol, like in dry states of India, they consume the cough syrup for satisfying their desire to satisfy the alcohol. So it is always misleading. So if the blood analyzer has to be done, While breath analyzer says that it is alarming levels are there, then you can be disqualified for driving. And if any accident has been done, then you can be incriminated in that you have negligently taken the act of driving while under the influence of alcohol. Now, what is the procedure of post-mortem report? Procedure of post-mortem report is the doctor who's authorized by the law. He will do the post-mortem examination of the victim on request of the investigating officer to find out the cause of death. So it is a legal procedure. It can't be done routinely on any person admitted and died in the hospital. It has to be a medical legal examination. There should be a proper reason, like if it is an accident, if it is a case of suicide, or if it is case of homicide, suspected homicide, then the police officer of that area in which the crime has happened will submit to the duty doctor to go for post-mortem examination. That is a proper procedure for doing that.
Sir, one question is there. Sir, how is DNA used in crime scene investigation? Like criminals nowadays are getting smart in committing crimes in such a way that no DNA trace is left behind. How do we know that DNA evidence is reliable?
Now, DNA evidence is it is a evidence which comes under the locus principle. So, if a person who is like, I will give just an example. If it is a case of sexual assault, and if the seminal stains are found on the victim's body and they are sent for analysis, then DNA becomes important. Then, if the person who was the victim, she tried to defend, so in that she made scratching nail marks on the accused. So those skin debris will be found in the victim's nail, under nail. So that can be sent for DNA analysis, and that can prove that it was the same accused which did this. So most of the time when the crime is done by what we say a criminal who is doing it repeatedly, a serial killer, so they try to remove this evidence, these type of evidence from the scene of crime. They will clean up the the vaginal area. They will clean up the nails of the victim. They will try to remove these type of evidence. But trace evidence can still be traced if the proper crime scene investigation is done by the forensic team. So there is not always zero. We can say that zero evidence can be done from the scene of the crime.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Have given to us and give support to us. So we will thank you for this enlightening session. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Now
Okay.
we will meet at 3 o'clock for next session. Thank you, sir.